Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and once again today we're wallowing in Rough Rider history. And you can't talk about Rough Rider history without talking about George Reed. So much has been said, so much has been written since George joined the Rough Riders in 1963. Sometimes you're not even sure what to say, what more could be said. But I've got some George Reed factoids here that you may find of interest. Factoid number 1. He was such an amazing athlete, such an amazing football player, that not only did he play fullback at Washington State University, he was a linebacker, and a very good one at that. Factoid number 2. While at Washington State, he was teammates with two other future Rough Rider greats, Hugh Campbell, Gluey Huey, the great receiver, and Garner Ekstrand, who was a terrific defensive lineman and a linebacker in the 1960s. Ekstrand, Reed, and Campbell all helped the Rough Riders win their first Grey Cup in 1966. Factoid number 3. In George Reed's first game as a Saskatchewan Rough Rider, the Riders were in Edmonton for the regular season opener, and George scored what proved to be the game-winning touchdown. He rushed for 74 yards in that game. Factoid number 4. After the 1964 season, George Reed had had it with the head coach, Bob Shaw. He was not going to return to the Rough Riders. Neither was Ron Lancaster, who had similar sentiments about Bob Shaw. The Toronto Argonauts came to the rescue, as it turned out. They pursued Bob Shaw and offered him a lot more money to coach than the Rough Riders could afford, so Bob Shaw was off to Toronto. After Bob Shaw left, the Rough Riders were looking for a head coach, and they didn't have to look very far. They promoted Eagle Keys, who had been an assistant coach in Saskatchewan in 1964, and one of his first moves was to reach out to Ron Lancaster and say, "You're our quarterback." Bob Shaw had had his doubts, Eagle Keys had no doubts. George Reed was also very happy to return to the Rough Riders, and he went on to enjoy 11 more seasons in green and white. Factoid number 5. This one's well known, but there's a bit of statistical trivia here. George Reed set a Rough Rider single-game rushing yardage record in 1965, gaining 268 when the Riders went to Empire Stadium in Vancouver in October of that year. What's interesting to me is that 268-yard total really jumps off the page when you consider that in 2016, Curtis Steele led the Rough Riders with 334 yards rushing all season. Factoid number 6. I guess you can use two sixes in this case because we're talking about the 1966 Grey Cup. And George Reed scored memorably a 31-yard touchdown in that game on a run that pretty much iced the outcome for the Rough Riders. On the previous play, though, George had gained 10 yards and only a shoestring tackle had prevented him from scoring. And George was not given to displays of frustration or emotion on the field, but after that 10-yard gain, he banged his fist on the turf. He was not happy that he hadn't scored, so on the next play, given another chance, he was off to the races to the end zone. But for the final few yards, he kind of kicked his feet high. And it wasn't an example of showboating. He just wanted to make sure that there wasn't another shoestring tackle on that play. George Reed factoid number 7. This one blows me away. At one point in his playing career, George was involved with 47 different charitable or community groups. At one time, 47. For example, he was one of the founders of Special Olympics in Saskatchewan. Somebody asked George once, "How do you find time to do all these things?" And his response was, "If you need something done, find a busy person." George Reed factoid number 8. He was at the Summer Olympics in 1992 in Barcelona. He was there to watch his daughter, Georgette, compete in shot put. George Reed factoid number 9. He had 6 relatives who played in the National Football League. Let's start with his brothers, Smith Reed and Frank Reed. There's also George's brother-in-law, Jerry Levias. 2 cousins of George's, Miller Farr and Mel Farr, played in the NFL, and so did his half-brother, Clancy Williams. George Reed factoid number 10. He actually had an opportunity to play professional football in the United States. He was in his early 30s when the Denver Broncos approached him, and they wanted him to become the Broncos' next fullback. However, it was more worth his while to stay here. He had a good job with Molson's. He was entrenched in the community with the Rough Riders. He decided to stay with the Rough Riders. George Reed factoid number 11. In the spring of 1975, he shocked everybody, even though he was 36 years old at the time, by retiring from football. What made it surprising was that the previous January, he'd signed a 2-year contract extension to remain with the Riders. In fact, in his final season with the Rough Riders in 1975, he'd gained 1,454 yards along the ground. That was the 3rd highest total of his career. Yet, he just felt that the fire wasn't burning the way it should as training camp was approaching, and he decided to retire. George Reed factoid number 12. This one's a bit of a reach. It's a bit quirky, but I'll throw it in there anyway. George Reed was born October 2nd, 1939 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. At a very young age, the Reed family moved to Renton, Washington, where George grew up. But for the record, He was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Vicksburg, Mississippi is now the home of Bill Lancaster, Ron Lancaster's brother. The 13th and final factoid, and we could probably recite hundreds if not thousands of George Reed factoids, but in 1978 he became a member of the Order of Canada, and that's an honor made to order for a gentleman and an athlete the caliber of George Reed. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time today. If you'd like, please subscribe to our YouTube channel where all these videos reside. There's a little bell insignia. If you press on that, you'll be notified as future videos become available. Thanks very much and have a great day.